We welcome the Federal Court's judgment that investigations by The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald were correct in their reporting that Ben Roberts-Smith committed war crimes. The findings by Justice Anthony Besanko today that Roberts-Smith participated in the execution of Afghans confirms our reports that the Victoria Cross recipient breached the Geneva Convention and is a critical step towards justice for the families of the murder victims. The judgment is a vindication for journalists Nick McKenzie and Chris Masters, who began reporting this difficult and complicated story more than 7 years ago. It is a vindication for the many people in our newsrooms and our organisation who supported this really important public interest journalism. And most importantly, it is a vindication for the brave soldiers of the SAS who served their country with distinction and then had the courage to speak the truth about what happened in Afghanistan. Nick and Chris painstakingly pieced together these investigations, and today's judgment exemplifies how the exhaustive public interest journalism of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald serves our community and serves our country. The series of stories at the centre of this trial will have a lasting impact on the Australian Defence Force and how our soldiers conduct themselves in Afghanistan. It's important to remember that while today is a pivotal moment in this story and we are very pleased with the result, the story goes on beyond this judgment. We will continue to hold people involved in war crimes to account. The responsibility for these atrocities does not end with Ben Roberts-Smith. Publishing a story of this magnitude is never easy, but high-quality investigative journalism is vital to a thriving democracy. Nine's unequivocal backing of this reporting and our defence of it is a clear demonstration of its commitment to quality journalism. I'll now hand over to Nick and Chris.
Gentlemen, a big win for public interest journalism.
Thank you very much. Thank you to James as well. I think it was a great call back in June 2018 to run that story. I think it will go down in the history of the news business as one of the great calls. It was wonderful to be supported by Nine. I have a great deal of gratitude to the judge. This was a very difficult case. You often say in defamation that there are few winners. I'm glad to say I'm not standing here as a loser, but I don't think it is true that anybody comes out of a matter like this feeling exultant and triumphant. I'm so grateful to our lawyers. In my time, I've seen great teams come together, and what was wonderful about this was the coalition of such a great team led by Nick Owens. Terrific work by Chris Mitchell and Lyndell Bartlett and Peter Bartlett and also Dean Leviton. I think it's a relief for the media, frankly. We're so often on our knees. It often feels so hard to even do ordinary work, let alone work as difficult as this. So this judgment comes as a great relief. And my final words go to those soldiers. I don't want people to think of this as a bad day for Australian soldiers. I think of those soldiers that not only had physical courage, but also moral courage. Nick and I know them well. We've spent a lot of time with them, and I'm proud that they're out there, that as journalists we can meet Australian people who are prepared to tell a difficult truth and stand up to it. It was 110 days of them being punished in the witness box, and they did so wonderfully well. I'm so grateful to all of them. Thank you.
I'd just like to say today is a day of justice. It's a day of justice for those brave men of the SAS who stood up and told the truth about who Ben Roberts-Smith is. A war criminal, a bully and a liar. Australia should be proud of those men in the SAS. They are the majority in the SAS, and they stood up for what was right, and they have been vindicated. Today is a day of some small justice for the Afghan victims of Ben Roberts-Smith. Ali Jan was the man kicked off the cliff. Ali Jan was a father. Ali Jan was a husband. He has children who no longer have a father. He has a wife who no longer has a husband. He was kicked off a cliff by Ben Roberts-Smith, and he was murdered with Ben Roberts-Smith's participation. There's some small justice for him. There's justice for the Afghan villagers who stood up in court, like the SAS soldiers who implicated Ben Roberts-Smith in war crimes. The Afghan villagers who stood up in court on Ben Roberts-Smith's instructions were mocked, belittled by Ben Roberts-Smith's counsel. They too have been found to have spoken the truth. And finally, a massive thank you to Chris for believing in investigative journalism, for standing beside me in the toughest fight of our journalistic careers. We couldn't have done it without each other. We couldn't have done it without our brave colleagues in the newsrooms. We couldn't have done it without our editors. And we couldn't have done this without the best legal team in the country. So one word, justice.
What do you make of Mr. Roberts-Smith's decision not to be here today?
I think we'll just take a couple of quick questions and then bugger off. But Ben Roberts-Smith launched this case. Me and Chris did not want to go to court. None of the SAS witnesses who testified about Roberts-Smith's war crimes wanted to go to court. Ben Roberts-Smith brought this case. He came most every day, but he did not come to the day of judgment. He's in Bali doing whatever he's doing. But we're here, and we're here to welcome justice and the truth.
Nick, what should happen to his awards, his Victoria Cross?
Now's the time for the nation and the Defence Force to absorb what the judge has found. The full findings will be released in due course. What is clear is Ben Roberts-Smith is a liar. Someone described Ben Roberts-Smith to me as the Lance Armstrong of the Australian military, and I think we must now take that as truth. What happens to his awards and decorations is a matter for others.
What would you like Ben Roberts-Smith to reflect on today? Nick, what would you like Ben Roberts-Smith to reflect on today?
Last question. I'd like Ben Roberts-Smith to reflect on the pain that he's brought lots of men in the SAS who stood up and told the truth about his conduct. They were mocked and belittled in court. They were bullied. They were intimidated. Some had letters sent to them, threatening letters. I'd like Ben Roberts-Smith to reflect on the people he murdered, the man he kicked off a cliff, the Afghan villagers. That's what I think Ben Roberts-Smith should reflect on.